John Muir Show, 10:06 a.m. We recently spent a couple of weeks devoting part of each show to going through episodes of Making a Murderer 2, which was recently released to Netflix. We thought, who would be better to bring on the program than the special prosecutor who secured the convictions of both Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey. That would be Ken Kratz, and we head to the phones where he joins us now. Ken, thank you so much for your time today.
Good morning, John. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you on the program. So I'm not sure if you've watched Making a Murderer 2 or not, but regardless of if you have watched it or not, I know you've heard all about the worldwide buzz that's been surrounding this series and now once again surrounding the cases of Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey. I've got to ask, what is it like for you hearing so many people advocating on behalf of two violent murderers who you rightfully helped put behind bars?
Well, there's two kinds of contact that we're talking about. One is just reading general comments from pundits or others that don't really look into the case or the facts that were actually presented, but get their information from Netflix, whether it's season 1 or season 2 of Making a Murderer. It's hard to watch, John. It's hard to watch because much of what you're being shown on Netflix, especially season 1, just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
There was such deceptive editing of video. They did things like splicing, which is kind of the Taj Mahal of all deceptive editing, where they take a courtroom scene and they will show a question that was asked, but they won't show the answer that was given, John. What they actually do is they go harvest a different answer from a different part of the questioning, and then they attach it as if that was the answer that was given. So think about that a second. When you have a documentary, or what you're calling a documentary, and you show something you know is intentionally false, it's intentionally misrepresented, they show the question, but then they give a different answer on there to make the witness, in this case, Sergeant Colburn of the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, to make him look suspicious or sketchy, and it had that exact purpose to it. And so in season 1, when I complained of these kind of editing practices and said no legitimate movie maker would engage in this kind of behavior, not only did the documentary film industry not rise up as once and criticize the filmmakers in Making a Murderer, they gave them an Emmy award for creative editing, and that is the most despicable act that I can think of to reward these filmmakers for ruining the lives of several police officers, several prosecutors, and really calling into question the entire justice system. You can't do that, at least around these parts. Maybe you can get away with it in California or New York or some other place, but in Wisconsin, I've always said, if you're gonna accuse our cops of planting evidence or our system as being crooked, you better have something more than your elbows to place on the table, because that's the kind of allegation that riles people up, justifiably so. And when you misrepresent what happened to achieve that goal or that impression, it's just plain wrong. But the second part, John, that I talked about when you said about contact or what people might have been saying, the second part is me personally. I remain, or for whatever reason, the chief villain, I guess, in episode or season number 2, although they named the ex-boyfriend, they named Bobby Dassey, Scott Taddick, really named whoever didn't have the name Steven Avery as the real killer. That's what Attorney Zellner was trying to peddle. It's still me that is very much the individual that they suggest is the reason that these two men remain in prison. And as a result, predictably, because it happened the first time as well, myself and my wife and my family have gotten just incredibly specific and vile threats launched at us. Death threats are common. They've engaged in a behavior that you may have been familiar with. Just happened to Tucker Carlson, which is called doxing, where they recently, earlier this week, took a picture of my home that included the mailbox with the address on it, and posted it on some group that were haters of me and supporters of Avery and Dassey. You wonder what's the end game there? Do they want me to be hurt or killed, or my property, or my wife, or what's going on? So when it rises to that level of really harassment and intimidation and threats for something that I, as a prosecutor, did, 12, 13 years ago when we secured the convictions of these two murderers, makes you shake your head, John. Makes you wonder what it is that this world's coming to, and what it is that these people on the internet, where they feel this entitlement to do these kind of things. Why is it that they feel entitled to threaten my life or call my wife horrible things or want to rape my daughter while I have to watch? Where does all this come from, John? This is the kind of vitriol. It's the kind of anger. It's the kind of I don't want to bring in politics here, but at least it's something that we have seen that is becoming more and more prevalent in our country, and I think it's a very, very dangerous turn that we've taken away from civility or away from just being able to share your feelings with somebody and going after them, their business or their family. I think it's shameful.
Well, it absolutely is. And like we've said on this program, it doesn't matter how you feel about an individual. No American citizen should be subjected to the kind of behavior that you mentioned Tucker Carlson was recently subjected to, and what it sounds like your family's going through as well. I'm so sorry to hear that is happening. That is absolutely disgusting that anybody would do that. You talk about, Ken, about how in the second portion of Making a Murderer that you continue to be deemed as the main villain, and a lot of that seems to have to do with Kathleen Zellner. Whenever she referenced your name on camera in that second part of Making a Murderer, she would treat it like a joke, saying like basically, "Oh, Ken Kratz, what a pathetic member of the legal community." Do you find it interesting that you are being downgraded by Kathleen Zellner when you successfully prosecuted her client? Well, she's been on the job for nearly 3 years trying to overturn that conviction and hasn't even moved the ball a single yard in his favor?
Well, if you recall, Kathleen Zellner, I think, famously promised that within 30 days of her taking over the case, she would name the real killer by Mother's Day of the first year she became involved, 2016. Stephen Avery would be home. So we're all waiting for that. We're all waiting for something, some kind of new evidence. What she calls new evidence that she presented to the circuit court was a joke. Mm-hmm. I think most legal scholars agree with that. If you can't even get a hearing on a post-conviction, if it isn't strong enough that the court even needs to hear what you or your so-called experts have to say, I think it's very telling. What's also telling, though, John, is what she presents in Making a Murderer 2 as real evidence. That just isn't this brain mapping or brain fingerprint nonsense that Kathleen Zellner knows has never been admissible evidence, never been admitted in one court case throughout the U.S. Yet she touts it as it is, the centerpiece of why he's going to get a new trial. Most of your audience, I'm sure, doesn't know and wouldn't by watching Making a Murderer 2. That I don't believe Zellner even put the brain mapping in her motion for a new trial. She didn't even bother to file it with the court because it's so discredited and it is so weak. It has no probative value at all. So that's the kind of shenanigans that Making a Murderer 2 continues to play with the public. They continue to trumpet the activities of defense attorneys, whether they're Avery's defense attorneys or Dassey's, suggesting that they're fighting the good fight and they must be up against a crooked system. That's the only reason that they haven't been successful in their appeals. I would suggest the other reason, of course, is that they're both representing guilty murderers, and it was clear at the trial. It remains clear today. This is probably the most scrutinized criminal trial, maybe in history, as far as how many people have looked at every angle of this case, every angle of the 15 months of preparation that we had for it. Yet my work, whether it's that from the investigative side or the prosecution side, has withstood all of these challenges. It stood up very, very well. It's used as a training tool for homicide detectives throughout the entire country on a good, competent way to handle high-profile murder cases. And so when the legitimate law enforcement community and legal community believe that not only was this a fair trial, but it was a exceedingly well investigated and prosecuted case, somebody on the other side, somebody on Zellner's side, should sit up and take notice, because otherwise you're going to keep getting thrown out of court without even a hearing.
And we're being joined by Ken Kratz here on the John Muir Show. We only have a few minutes left here before we have to go to break, but whether it be the physical evidence that the Zellner team has not been able to refute, she was doing throughout the second part of Making a Murderer what I like to call sixth-grade science experiments, trying to see if she could splatter blood against her own RAV4 and claim somehow, it landed a different spot than Hellbach's blood landed when Avery did it. It must be a hoax. And it was just hilarious watching that she thought that was even close to being admissible in court, the results of any of those little experiments her and her friends were conducting. But in addition to that, you had the confession of Brendan Dassey, one of the two murders, and you keep saying, you keep hearing from folks who are on Avery and Dassey's side that should be thrown out. But if I recall correctly, both Brendan and Brendan's mother consented to this confession being given, to him speaking to investigators. And even though, sure, Brendan Dassey's not going to be joining Mensa anytime soon, he is someone who is deemed legally competent. He had said multiple times he understood what he was doing, as the investigators asked him repeatedly, do you agree to talk to us? Do you understand what's going on here? I mean, there is really no legal merit whatsoever in throwing out Brendan's confession, is there?
All of the factors for admissibility of evidence, for competency, and for whether or not it's coerced were considered by the federal Seventh Court of Appeals, and the majority writer, Judge Hamilton, noted that voices were never raised in this case. Brendan was read his rights. His mother, by the way, was there. Mm-hmm. She was invited to participate in the interview. She chose not to be. And so what are the cops supposed to do when they invite the mom to sit in and she chooses not to thereafter suggest, well, you should have a parent present, for this kind of an interview? I wonder what they were supposed to do. We all know that she was there, of course, because you see her walking in at the end of the interview, and that's when Brendan says, "They got to my head." He's really apologizing to his mother for talking, because the number one Avery rule is you don't talk to the cops. Mm-hmm. And so, in fact, Stephen Avery gets into a fight with Barb thereafter, complaining to Barb that you didn't train him well enough. You didn't train him not to talk to the cops, and that's pretty telling as far as the culture on the Avery property. But there was such detail that Brendan gave, things that people didn't hear, that the justices said he could resist any suggestion that on 13 different occasions, and so it's really not as it's depicted. But more importantly than that, Stephen Avery should never mention the Brendan Dassey interview, because it was never used as evidence in this case. Not one word of it, not one word of the Dassey confession was ever presented in Avery's case. It was all based upon the science. It was all based upon the evidence that was left and all the circumstances surrounding it. Nothing about Brendan Dassey was presented. So why would they claim that what happened in the Brendan Dassey case has any influence or impact on Avery at all? It's disingenuous. It's once again lying to millions of people. They get away with it. They're never asked any tough questions, and I hope as this thing moves forward, John, that people will start taking a more critical look at not just Making a Murderer, but all quote-unquote documentaries that you see, and understand that you're being shown exactly what they want you to see.
That's
nothing else, all right? So you're being fed information and their conclusions, and from that alone, you shouldn't be rendering an opinion, especially as serious as the cops are crooked or the prosecution engaged in misconduct. So hopefully, like I said, as we move forward, the truth will come out. I'm going to continue to keep pushing back. Nobody else seems willing to do that, but I'm going to have to, because if this is left unchecked, if they just continue to run over our justice system like this, and I fear that we're in a bad place.
And Ken Kratz, we completely have your back on that going forward. We have to go, but thank you so much for your time today. We greatly appreciate that time and insight.
Very good, John. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Have a great day.